we will start by welcome remarks, and the first speakers will be Zhu Xiang. Xiang, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Edmund, and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed very honored to give these opening remarks at the event jointly organized by the Task Force on Carbon Pricing in Europe, the Paulson Institute, and the International Finance Forum, with the theme of fostering carbon-free sources of energy in the world. China, the EU, and the US at the forefront. This meeting contributes to the important discussion of increasing the global renewable and nuclear power capacity to fight against the global warming and climate change ahead of the COP21 summit in Baku, Azerbaijan this November. Energy sits at the heart of climate change solutions. At the COP28 held in Dubai last year, countries have agreed with the objective to triple the capacity of renewable energy by 2030. As the second largest economy in the world, China has been committed to promoting a diverse and sustainable energy mix to achieve energy security, reduce reliance on fossil fuel, and address climate challenges. China adheres to innovation-driven development and accelerates technological innovation in energy. In the field of energy supply, breakthroughs have been made in the key technologies, such as the third-generation nuclear power. China leads the world in the conversion efficiency of photovoltaic cells, ultra-high voltage transmission technology, and the hydropower industry. The industrialization pace of cutting-edge technologies, such as new energy storage and hydrogen energy, is accelerating. China is also spearheading global efforts in electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and photovoltaic products, which are all important part of countries' commitment to its dual carbon goals and outstanding achievement in energy transition. In 2023, the newly installed capacity of renewable energy in China exceeded the total of the rest of the world. To date, China has been the biggest contributor to promoting the development of the global renewable energy industry. The International Finance Forum is an independent, non-profit, non-governmental international organization founded in 2003 and established by financial leaders from more than 20 countries and regions, including China. As a long-standing high-level platform for dialogue, communications, and multilateral cooperation, the IFF helps promote sustainable development through its platforms. Earlier this month, I'm pleased to share the International Finance Forum and the China Electric Power Construction Association, CEPCA, announced the establishment of the IFF Energy Transition and Development Committee in an effort to drive sustainable energy practices and fostering global cooperation in the energy sector. The establishment of IFF Energy Transition and Development Committee marks a significant milestone in the global efforts to accelerate the transition to renewable and sustainable energy solutions worldwide. Through its committee, the IFF and the CEPCA leverage their respective strengths and expertise in energy, finance, technology to promote innovation, investment, and the policy frameworks that support the global energy transition, as well as green transition. Ladies and gentlemen, at this critical time for actions against climate change, let us embrace the spirit of partnership and innovation. Let us commit ourselves to advancing sustainable energy solutions that are key to our survival. Let us dedicate ourselves to making our planet more sustainable for our future generations. I hope you have fruitful discussion at this meeting. Thank you, Edmund.
Thank you, Xian. That's very nice. Thank you for these welcome remarks. Is Deborah there with us, or she has not arrived yet?
I don't see her connected.
Okay, then she will make the concluding remarks, or she will make her remarks later on. So let me make my own welcome remarks. And before everything, a great welcome to all of you. This seminar, which has been organized in a trilateral format by the International Finance Forum, the Paulson Institute, and the Task Force on Carbon Pricing in Europe, cannot be more topical. On climate change, the UN Secretary General recently said that the world needed an exit ramp from the highway, I quote, to climate hell. True enough, the global average temperature for the last 12 months has risen to 1.63 degrees above the pre-industrial average. I remind you, and you know it, that at COP21 in Paris, we set a ceiling at 1.5 degrees. And Antonio Guterres warns us that nearly a decade from the Paris Agreement, the goal was hanging at a thread, given that we already faced incursions into the 1.5C territory. The landscape is not totally black. Fatih Birol recently declared that clean energy coming from renewables will produce 35% of electricity in 2025 against 30% in 2023. Coal, which last year was the principal source of electricity in the world, with 33.4%, will be behind. And I quote him, I quote, "For each dollar dedicated today to fossil fuel energy, nearly $2 are invested in clean energy." Needless to say that there are huge investments in renewable in the world, in China in the first place. And remind us that the investment in renewable in China are remarkable, but also to a lesser extent in the US and in Europe. The equation of the problem is very simple. The demand is rising and will rise in the future. If we want a slowdown followed by a decrease in carbon emissions, we need a progressive substitution of fossil fuels by renewables and nuclear. The huge challenge, indeed. I remind you that following the COP28 in Dubai, countries committed, and Xiang reminded us that, I repeat, to work together to triple the world installed renewable energy generation capacity. Triple. They are up to 2030. There are major obstacles to these objectives. One of them being the relative low price of fossil fuels, but there are also opportunities coming from technology, as well as the willingness from many governments to go in the right direction. To explore this major issue for mankind, the Task Force on Carbon Pricing in Europe has teamed up with two important think tanks of China, the International Finance Forum, and of the US, the Paulson Institute. Nothing, in my view, is more important than to discuss among the three blocs about this major issue. We won't win the war against climate change without close collaboration between the US, China, and Europe. Let me thank our partners for their commitments. I want as well to thank all the speakers that have accepted to join us in this period of vacation. This event will be split, as you know, into two parts. The first will deal with renewables, and the second with nuclear. And we'll start with a guest speaker, Peter Juncken, co-founder and president of the European Business Angels Network, who will focus his intervention on technology and on startups' microenvironment. To end up, a reminder. Interest of these seminars rests also on the capacity of the floor to intervene, and hence on a fruitful exchange between all of us. I would therefore be grateful to all speakers to abide by the time they have been allotted. And now, without any further ado, I give the floor to my friend Peter Juncken. Peter, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, my friends. This is a great opportunity to see you again after some time, and all of the hosts in the US and China and in Europe. So I will be concentrating on the role of technology and of startups. You can phrase it in another word, on the micro foundations of economic dynamism. I think that is going to be the key on emerging of new and developing new energy technologies through innovation. That may be, at the end of the day, the long-range solution for all the problems we are talking about. The fact is still that there is a slowing of the speed of leading to climate changing and to climate neutrality. And still, there is a fossil dominance, no question about this. The fossil corporations have record profits in the last couple of years because of the combination of pricing and growing demand for energy. So the share of oil and gas and coal is still leading. Renewables are much slower on a percentage than the fossils. The wind farm revolution basically didn't, at least, I wouldn't say it's broken, but it did not emerge as a solution. And although that may be one of the best solutions over the long run, but still it needs maybe a new approach from companies and politics. The world is hungry still for fossil energy. As I said, the switch to renewables is moving, but largely based in Europe on taxpayers' money, particular here. And if you see the huge investments of the oil and gas companies, the question is, why are we not able to convert these huge amounts of investments into the renewable? Maybe other people have the answer. I don't know. I do not have the answer. But the fact is that oil consumption in the OECD countries between 2012 and 22 has increased by 1.4 million barrels per day. That is, we are not really on the right track yet, not with high speed. And so still the energy, for the energy corporations, the fossil business is still very profitable. And therefore, it is so important that we may find ways for them to really change their attitude in terms of what they're going to invest. There are much larger investments are taking place now in oil and gas and so on in the fossil than in the renewables. If you see, for instance, the investment plan, capital expenditure of Shell, one of them in 2023, oil and gas accounted for 22 billion, low carbon for 3 billion, which is 12% versus 88%. The share price of the oil companies has gone up in the last couple of years by all of them between 50 and 70%. So obviously there are some underlying trends which we should really try to explore much more in detail. Therefore, it would be important. It would be important that we are seeing a rethinking, and obviously that is startup on what I would call a technology open solution. And that means basically technology open through innovation and international cooperation. It's very clear that without innovation, we would be no growth and no wealth in the world. Innovation is the key driver of economic growth, and all modern development in the world, all growth in the last 250 years is based on this innovation. Why do I say that? We had other problems in the world which the world was able to solve with a market economy, you may call it capitalism. So innovation-driven market economies, I think, were the key to finding new solution. And if I may use a quote from Karl Popper from the history of the poverty of historicism, where he said, if there is such a thing as growing human knowledge, then we cannot anticipate today what we will only know tomorrow. Therefore, it's so important that we have that in mind. Now, the difference between the invention and the innovation is very easy. The one is to gain new knowledge through research. The innovation is to transfer the new knowledge into new products and services. You can say it in short, invention is turning money into new knowledge, versus the innovation is turning, invention is turning money into new knowledge, and the innovation is turning the new knowledge back into money. If we follow that idea, then I think it would be very important to find out what is needed for economic growth. That's creative entrepreneurs on the research based on risk-taking investors, that's angel investors, helping to grow a business through the transfer of entrepreneurial experience, the transfer of networking contacts, and the finance as seed money to grow. In that order, that is very important to understand. Therefore, it is so important that we increase understanding the role of the entrepreneur, the startup, and for the role of the entrepreneur as transfer agents. We probably need more to lead in innovation and in uncharted waters, to lead us into territories we have not been before. I know that many people don't believe in the markets, but history has proven that is so important. Therefore, to increase the number of entrepreneurs is and increasing the startup rate. Unfortunately, in Europe, and even including in Germany, the number of startups is going down. The number of entrepreneurs is going down. There are other parts of the world, where the US and in China, where this is different. So even if the spending on R&D is so important, more important probably is to gain access to the results of R&D worldwide. We're not fixed to a nation, and to use the knowledge of other countries. The dissemination of knowledge makes it possible to solve problems. And with this, we would be easy increasing entrepreneurial activities and increasing economic dynamism. With that, I just want to draw the attention, 70% of all tech startups in the US are funded by business angel investments. And Edmund Phelps, our Nobel Prize winner and friend, has used the word mass innovation or mass flourishing, a book which has been very popular, as I understand, in China, and has been very quoted, often quoted by the previous prime minister. I think if we try to encourage more founders and more becoming entrepreneurs, it is so important for the economic dynamism. And let me use one phrase on we use the huge numbers mentioned spending on capital expenditure by the oil and gas companies. Actually, in some countries, this is much larger than all of the VC, the venture capital, which is the key for funding of startup companies. And if you look on the worldwide trend, we see a majority now of VC in mega rounds is in energy and in AI. There is an interlink, which I've been not able to go into that, but the majority of VC is still invested in the US. The majority of AI VC is in the US. Europe, unfortunately, is decreasing its spending on that. And therefore, it is so important that we understand the key for the dynamism on this part of spending for the finance startups. The angel investors, the most famous angel investor was a friend of Bill Gates, who had Steve Ballmer. He had an angel investor. I'm just mentioning that this is not a very strange crime of people. Today, we see the dynamism. I see that, frankly, through my trips in the US and in China, in both parts of the world, we see more dynamism in that than in Europe. And I think when we all tell each other what we should learn from each other, we should learn in particular from the mistakes which we have made also in Europe, in order not to understand enough of the micro foundations of economic dynamism. And therefore, I'm sure that this conference will lead us to hopefully some new ideas, which are so important for the future handling of that key issues of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for this Schumpeterian, if I may, Schumpeterian
Right.
presentation. It's by the way, Schumpeter was excellent, and
Yeah.
he was excellent on this on many of his analysis, but on this point, he clearly saw the importance of the entrepreneur, of innovation, and in a certain sense of markets. The functioning of markets can have a big impact on entrepreneurship. And so thank you very much. You will see during the first session how people will focus on this issue of innovation, which is at the heart of the issue of renewables. And that on this occasion, there will be probably questions about what you said. Now, I start the first session on renewables, and I immediately give the floor for a presentation, an introductory presentation by Amy Barr. Amy is senior analyst at the International Energy Agency. Amy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here as well and to speak at this forum. And I will be talking about renewables and the role of these three markets and how we can achieve the global tripling of renewable, which is pledged in the COP28. So I'd like to share my screen to present some slides. So today, there are discussions around updating the national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Renewables indeed play an important role in these nationally determined contributions today. 90% of them basically mentions renewables, and half of which actually quantify renewables, which means they provide some sort of a quantitative target. However, only 14 NDCs have explicit reference to total renewable capacity, which means that the goal that the globe agreed in COP28 last year. However, this is normal because the renewable capacity, total renewable capacity, was not in the agenda before COP28. There were other targets. As this is agreed we see an incredible opportunity for countries in the next round of NDC preparation to include goals or industry-specific or sector-specific goals, including renewables, energy efficiency, reduction of the methane emissions, to basically talk about their possible contribution to these pledges that are agreed in COP28. And when we sum up these 14 nationally determined contributions, we are arriving way less than 2,000 gigawatts of total installed capacity. By the way, 80% of which it is China's wind and solar PV goal that is in their NDC. So it's basically China making up all these NDC goals that we have today. However, at the IEA, we basically looked at whether there are other government ambitions that are not in the NDCs, which there are many. We went country by country and policy by policy. And then we basically found that there is 8,000 gigawatts of the renewables that are today in the government policy documents, targets, plans, modeling results, and so on and so forth. And which means that from 2020 levels today, these goals lead to 2.2 times increase. Different trends for emerging and developing economies and advanced economies. Obviously, advanced economies have a larger base of renewables today, so they are expected, according to their plans, to double, and then basically the emerging and developing economies to grow 2.5 times. However, to reach the tripling, the pace needs to change drastically. So this is the big ambition gap that we are talking here, which means that countries need to increase their ambition. For emerging and developing countries, actually 50%, and for advanced economies, a similar number in order to increase the pace. And when we look at the regional or country level distribution of these contributions that we looked at for today's ambitions, not for tripling, China obviously accounts for 40% of all the country's ambitions. Obviously, the share of China in today's renewable energy markets is more than 40%. And its goals are also pretty impressive based on the local modeling results that we were able to put together. Obviously, it follows by Europe, Asia Pacific region, and United States and Canada. Their contribution together makes up more than 80%. Then we have smaller contributions from other regions to this global policy ambition that is today, which is 8,000 gigawatts. From Latin America, Middle East, and North Africa.
Excuse me, are you aware that the slides are not moving?
No, I'm not aware because I can see my slides moving.
Ah, that's a problem because it is not moving. That's right.
Sorry, I am going to fix it.
You're sharing the wrong string.
Can you see now?
No. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So this is basically the different countries' contributions, and I will maybe show this slide, which is the second slide, to show the countries' ambitions that we collected, which is more than the NDCs, 8,000, and then the famous 11,000 tripling. That what needs to be done by advanced economies and emerging and developing countries. So when we look at how many countries are expected to have ambition or goals or targets, only 11 countries don't have any goals that are published, and they account for a very small capacity of today's renewables. There are a lot of countries, 73 of them are expected to grow between 1 to 2 times their renewable capacity. The majority of the capacity, or 28 countries, this includes China, United States, are expected to expand their renewable capacity 2 to 3 times. And a smaller number of countries are expected to basically expand greater than 3 times. And there are 3 countries already exceeded their ambition, 2030 ambition that are mentioned, which means they are not very ambitious on these things. In this picture, we see that there are different paces of the countries based on current policy ambitions. All of these ambitions need to be increased, by the way, to reach the tripling goal. But at least as we stand today in the preparation of NDCs, we find an important differences between countries based on their starting points and energy mix. For instance, nobody expects Canada to triple their renewable capacity because they already have 70% share of renewables in their system. But they need to expand wind and solar PV to be able to reach their 90% goal, for instance. And when we look at last year's pace of renewable deployment versus what countries need to do to reach their own ambitions, we see that there are 50 countries already on track to reach their goals, which means that they can increase their ambitions in the next NDCs because their implementation pace is faster than what they expect. This is basically an example is China. China's renewable energy growth is already going faster than what countries' ambitions are. In their NDC, China had 1,200 gigawatts of wind and solar PV installations by 2030. Next month or the month after, China already reached this target. So there needs to be an opportunity here to increase the ambition. When we look at Europe and the United States, the pace is very good. With slow increases in the pace, US and Europe will also be in line with their ambitions to reach the target, their own ambitions. However, there are other regions outside of Latin America who are completely off track of their ambitions, which are not that ambitious actually. Asia and Pacific needs to accelerate much larger. The same way, Middle East and Africa needs to be much faster than current pace in order to reach the goals. And we also have a forecast at the IEA showing how countries are going forward. This forecast doesn't go to 2030, but 2028. And we see an important acceleration of renewables in China, US, and European Union, which all these regions, according to the IEA, will surpass their own ambitions in the way to 2030. So again, an important opportunity to increase the ambition. Meanwhile, the other countries are becoming real renewable energy growth markets. Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa are becoming important markets going forward to be able to extend the renewables reach globally. So one important, we talked about the demand side, but there is the supply side of the renewables picture and clean energy technologies. And here, China's leadership is even much more important than its share in the demand of renewables. So without China and without China's scale of manufacturing and installing renewables, is very difficult, will be very difficult to combat the climate change. And as you can see here, between 22 and 23, clean energy technology investment has increased by almost 50%, and China was responsible for the majority of this increase for solar PV and batteries. And today, China really dominates the global market of clean energy technologies. It basically produces 80% of the solar modules in the world, actually 95% of the solar wafers in the world, and around 75% of the global battery manufacturing is taking place in China, which is quite important for the integration of renewables. And this supply challenge obviously important because today we have a lot of trade measures that are implemented. The global trade is a challenge for multiple countries, and I think it's important to highlight this issue of industrial policy, renewable policy, and beyond that, climate change policy needs to be highly integrated In addition to that, we have a new challenge of critical minerals policy, which is a new energy security dilemma that is going forward. And once we look at our forecast and where we are going today, so our basically main case, which we look at the business as usual case based on the current policies, sees 2.5 times increase in the renewable capacities, far from tripling. And our accelerated case basically looks at some policy challenges, which I will show in the next slide, sees 2.8 times. So it's an important achievement going forward if countries address challenges concerning permitting, financing, and social acceptance. And in the exercise, we basically try to cluster countries based on their key policies, and wanted to highlight the key challenges and providing solutions in our recent report. And in terms of this, our cluster one is basically mostly advanced economies with ambitious net zero plans and targeting full power sector decarbonization. And these markets, permitting, uncertainty option schedule, lack of grid infrastructure, lack of flexibility, and repowering aging renewable energy assets is an important challenge. For countries which a considerable share of hydropower in their system, but an increasing variable renewable capacity, which means solar PV capacity, this is most emerging economies. There is a high financing cost, which is a challenge, and emerging system integration challenges to increasing share of renewables. We have Southeast Asian markets with overcapacity of fossil fuels or firm contracts of fossil fuels, but ambitious long-term decarbonization targets. In these markets, locked young fossil fuel fleet. For instance, in Southeast Asia, it's just 11 years of age of coal plants, so it's very difficult to take them out of the system to increase renewables. They have long-term contracts already signed, but there is also perceived high renewable energy cost because of the fossil fuel subsidies and lack of policy environment. And the last cluster that we highlighted in terms of what policy areas governments do work is for the developing economies. And in these developing economies country, there's an incredible potential, strong, ambitious, but the grid is extremely weak to add new capacity, and the financing costs are extremely high. And
very much, Hemi. I give the floor immediately to Nicolas Pio. Nicolas, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Edmond. Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen also. Can you confirm that you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So it's a pleasure, and thanks a lot for the invitation to speak. Maybe as an introduction, just to say that we are an energy transition fund. So by definition, the premise of our investment thesis is the massive development of renewables to change the system. However, we do think that to reach the goal of tripling, we need to look at the hard facts and not necessarily the wishful thinking. And it's what I will try to convey as a message on the European side. Can you confirm that you see the slides moving down?
Yeah, perfectly.
So I'm not gonna take too much time here. This is known, but I think one important thing is to remember that energy policy is about a trilemma. It's always a matter of choosing between environmental sustainability, energy security, and affordability. And I think there was, for a time, a view that the massive development of RES, of renewables, was going to kill a little bit that debate, that it would make everything converge in the same direction. I think we know now that it's not true. And one reason, and I think it was very clearly said previously, the amount of investment is absolutely enormous. So we're talking trillions of dollars. And I think there is no way this amount of investment does not impact affordability of energy. But I think it will, and what I will try to show is that it will affect regions across the world very differently, and it will be particularly challenging for Europe. So there was a view that Europe was actually, that renewables development and energy transition had a deflationary impact on European energy prices. just because we come from higher fossil fuel prices compared to the US, for example, that there's a number of clean energy or clean technologies that are that have a lower cost if you translate them into dollar per barrel than the current view of long-term oil prices. But this is true when you look down the road, almost at the landing point, so 2050 or something. We think the real issue, and this is where we invest as investors, we think the real issue is in the meantime, up until 2030. So it's basically, how do we get to 2050? And in fact, I think we realize, in order to avoid making false promises, that in Europe, in the short to medium term, it will be inflationary, and we will have to deal with that. The first reason, very short term, it's just I would say the structure of investment of renewables. You see on the left hand side of the page, a study done conjointly by Lazard and the Paine Institute. Basically, if you add 4 percentage points to borrowing cost, it translates into a 20% increase in the LCOE for sun and 15% increase in the LCOE for wind. So the first element is, in an environment where -0 negative rates are over, and probably over for quite a long time, there will be a higher induced LCOE for renewables. The other element to take into consideration is that whereas CapEx is not much more sensitive than other forms of energy to steel prices, copper prices, etc., it is the component of critical materials in the clean tech and in the renewable sector is much higher than in other forms of energy generation. And so typically, this is where you have, for example, earth material per megawatt in a offshore wind turbine that you have in a CCGT. And so what it does is it exposes the rest sector to supply chain. We're seeing is borrowing costs are driving supply chains disruptions or potential disruptions are creating some uncertainty on the outlook in the short to medium term, let's say 5 years. Now, the very tough reality when you look at Europe is, said very bluntly, over the course of the last 15 years, European energy prices have gone up. And you see that on the left-hand chart. It has gone up in real terms consistently, and it has accelerated in the last 3 to 4 years. And that has happened in spite of massive decrease, and this is the right-hand chart, massive decrease of LCOEs of renewable technologies. And so there is this sort of contrast between generation costs supposed to cost less and less over the course of the last 10, 15 years, and the actual cost of energy in Europe going up, especially for households. Now, so the question is, why is that? The first one, we need to understand that renewables is a resource-driven industry.
We have a problem, Nicolas. I don't know if it is yours, but there are interruptions. And
someone who's put on hold, I think.
What's going on? Joel.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to have stopped. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
So, renewables, there's the CapEx component, there's the financing components. We should not forget the resource component. In the end, renewables is about having solar resource, having wind resource. And Europe here stands at a disadvantage, massive disadvantage, for example, compared to the US. Average load factors for sun and wind are 10% lower than in the US. It's actually at par with China. But here we're going to see a different matter for European generation. So Europe is at disadvantage for PV and onshore wind. One of the probable, I would say, advantages that we can foster and that we can sow and reap is probably offshore wind. Europe has a massive offshore wind potential, but it is a costly technology which requires a lot of very strong expertise, logistical expertise, etc. And this is certainly a sector where Europe is gaining some advantage globally, but this is a key topic. Now, if you look at what is much more critical for the European continent, is actually the remuneration scheme. And the reason why we have such a higher or increasing energy costs, and I think this is a fundamental topic to understand, is Europe is not taking out legacy fossil fuel generation or marginally. We are adding cost to the existing cost base. The reason for that is there is not that much growth in energy demand in Europe compared, for example, to China. So when we are adding up renewables, we're not there to fill the gap in between supply and demand. We're here to try to decarbonize, but we cannot take out coal, lignite, gas, etc., just for matters of stability of the system. And so you see that in what we call the residual demand forecast, which means that this is when everything that is must run is running, so renewables, hydropower, run-of-river, etc. You see that the volatility of the residual load is huge. What it means is that fossil fuel generation that needs to come up online, or nuclear that needs to come up online to make up for that residual demand, actually needs to be very flexible. And this is one of the major constraints. And the way it translates is that it translates into prices that are extremely volatile. With on this day, the intraday volatility was 694 euros per megawatt hours. The day ahead volatility was 694 euros per megawatt hour. The intraday volatility was even 600 euro per megawatt hour within the day. And the problem is that it creates a lot of operational constraints on the legacy asset base in Europe. So what can we do here? I think there are two things. Innovation is critical. And I think on this, maybe Europe is losing startups, but Europe is still accounting for 40% of all climate techs in the world. And flexibility is a major topic that needs to be investigated and then needs to be invested in. The other point is probably the reform of market design. There has been tentatives to say, okay, we're going to go away from the pay as you bid to the pay as you clear. We don't think this is going to work because it has shown that when you move away from marginal pricing to get the equilibrium on an organized market, generally it ends up showing suboptimal results. So we do think that there will be a reflection about the priority of dispatch for renewables, that is the status today, and that will affect the profitability of renewables going forward. And I will end on one element. I think if energy transition is seen in Europe as being very costly, we will have a backlash. And I think we've already seen some of that. And we need to keep in mind this energy trilemma. We need to find ways to protect those who are most vulnerable to those energy prices by transferring part of the money or by investing in ways that reduce the energy bill for those who have the harshest time. Otherwise, we will fail in meeting the goals of the COP28, and we will fail in getting this energy transition on track. I'll stop there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nicolas. Now we have Xi Tian, the General Manager of Strategy Management Center of Longy Green Energy Technology. Tian,
Yeah, yeah, this is Tian speaking. Can you see my screen?
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Hello, everyone. It's my great honor to share some opinions on behalf of LONGi, which is a leading company of the PV industry. And today, my presentation is green power plus green hydrogen contribute to net zero goal. So here, just like Nicholas pointed out just now, actually the World Energy Council believes that energy transition faces three difficulties. That's energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability, all of which can constitute the trilemma problem. And unfortunately, as a transporter and amplifier of clean energy, PV products can effectively balance the trilemma. In this page, I just show all of you a very simple mathematical calculation. It's calculated that silicon energy will directly consume 0.4 kilowatt hour per watt in the process from quartz mining to the production of PV industry chain. But finally, we can, get the energy output exceeds the energy consumptions by over 100 times. And in the past decade, due to lots of innovations, the cost of PV has dramatically decreasing by almost 90%. And there is still great space in the future, we believe. Currently, in the Middle East area, for example, the LCOE is close to 1 US cent per kilowatt hour. It's pretty lower. And we believe in the future, for example, the cost of photovoltaic will decrease faster than other energy sources. By 2050, the cost of electricity generated by PV. I think just now I dropped the line from here. So I would like to continue my presentation. Actually, last week in the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of CPC, China has unveiled a strategic roadmap to deepen reform and advance modernization, and decided to establish a sound mechanism for green and low carbon development, and to accelerate the planning and construction of a new energy system, and also to improve policies and measures for the consumption and regulation of new energy. In the meantime, United States is implementing domestic incentives to shift supply chain back to the United States. And also due to geopolitical reasons, more and more countries try to increase tariffs of PV products. This is a current situation all over the world. And due to the consumption issue, the global PV market is expected to shift to a medium-low growth rate in the coming years. Renewable Energy Society is working together on off-grid and microgrid technologies for integrated energy solutions, including, for example, PV plus wind, plus energy storage, plus hydrogen, and green ammonia sources, for example. And for LONGi, actually, we believe green power and green hydrogen will be the ultimate solution to achieve carbon neutrality. And during past 20 years, we put huge resources on our R&D activities, and we have a lot of innovations, and we hold several world records. For example, here we have the record for crystalline silicon-based solar cell. That's 27.3%, and also for silicon perovskite tandem solar cell, we have 34.6% efficiency. So that's a big achievement for us. Also, and LONGi strongly believes that the BC technology, which is developed by us, will be the long-term winner in the future. We believe in the next 3 or 5 years, BC technology will dominate the PV industry. And finally, I would like to show you some of our ESG achievements. LONGi actively practice ESG activity and disclose ESG information, and we are highly recognized by rating agencies all over the world. So this is our, some evidence actually starting from COP26. LONGi has been released with a white paper on climate action to publish our initiatives to address climate change. So in the future, we are looking forward to have more activities to realize the clean energy transition. So that's all for what I want to share today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tian. By the way, it would be interesting for all the participants to have the slides. I already have 2 slides, and I would appreciate Tian, Nicola, you sent your slide, Amy, and all those who have slides, if I can dispatch them just among participants.
Okay, definitely, no problem. We can share all of them to you.
Thank you. And Amy, I really, it would be nice if we could have your slides. Now, okay, and Damien Ma.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's great to be here. I must first say that Deborah just sent me a message, and she had a last minute on emergency issue she had to deal with, so she unfortunately couldn't be here, and she very much apologizes for that. But I will be speaking very briefly on the U.S. dynamics, and I want to thank the previous excellent presentations from our colleagues from Europe and China, which laid out, and also from the IEA, which laid out, excellent context for the global and the country-specific dynamics. And so on the U.S. side, there's obviously a lot to talk about, but I wanted to focus on one thing that I think is quite important, and that was brought up in some of the previous sessions. I don't have slides, but I'll just talk through them. I think the issue of industrial policy is a really important topic, and it's something that is driving U.S. energy and climate policy as we speak. So just a little bit of context. We saw how much China has invested in renewables. How much China has, basically run away with the game on solar PV, on batteries, and wind turbines. So in many ways, the United States is actually, ironically, trying to catch up with China on these sorts of investments. So, China, after the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, launched a very large stimulus. And a lot of that stimulus, you could be even construed as a green stimulus, because a lot of that went into the solar industry and wind And that's the decade about around 2010 when a Chinese renewable started to take off. So what the United States did after the pandemic, as part of its stimulus, was of course the Infrastructure Reduction, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the bilateral infrastructure law. Those two things are the biggest pieces of energy and climate-related legislation in recent U.S. history. They are, basically U.S.-style industrial policy, if I want to put it. That's sort of the simplest way to think about it. And the idea again is to drive investment. And the idea is to really to do two things, because this energy transition is obviously quite different from the oil and gas age. What you need for this energy transition are basically manufacturing and mining, right? You need the minerals, you need to dig the metals out of the ground and process them. That's the critical part of the energy transition, and manufacturing is the other part. It's not just oil and gas. You can't just put it in a barrel and use it. You have to actually build manufactured products. So manufacturing and mining. And the IRA and the BIL are mostly focused on the manufacturing aspect of it. And we and also, as someone else mentioned, securing supply chains. I'll just give you some headline numbers. Since 2022, the IRA and the BIL, the two pieces of legislation, have resulted in about $80 billion of public funding into the clean energy sector. And that has actually driven $400 billion of clean power and clean energy manufacturing investment from the private sector. So that's every $1 of public spending has driven roughly about $5 of private investment. And that's really the intent of these pieces of major legislation. And according to our colleagues at the IEA, I'll just read this. For every $1 dollar spent on fossil fuels in 2023, $1.40 was directed towards clean energy, and that's also part of being driven by the IRA and the BIL. And in terms of what it's been, where the money is going, actually not directly to EVs so much, but it's going a lot to batteries, battery storage. It's going to solar, and it's going to wind. Essentially, some of the similar things that China has been invested in heavily. So the goal is that between 2023 to 2027, the IRA is supposed to drive basically, we want to quadruple battery module manufacturing from 4 gigawatts to 17 gigawatts. Solar module manufacturing from 16 gigawatts to 78 gigawatts. So that's about quintupling roughly. Solar cells also from 6 gigawatts to 34 gigawatts. That's from 2023 to 2027. So it's a pretty significant effort in basically what I would call catching up on investment in those things. And of course, that comes with I think the U.S. government's view that they also want to secure more domestic supply chains as part of that, and we can go into that. And the other piece is obviously mining. Mining is something that I think the U.S. government is, or at least our legislation is not doing as well on. Mining is very complicated in the United States, and a lot of the resources in the United States happen to be on indigenous land, and there's just a lot of regulations. Being able to really mine. For example, the U.S. still only has one active rare earth mine, as far as I know. So the United States probably cannot, it's unlikely to start a domestic mining boom, and is going to have to rely on allies and other countries to supply a lot of the, critical minerals like cobalt, copper, obviously rare earth. For example, one of the important inputs into all clean energy, particularly EVs and wind turbines, are permanent magnets, rare earth permanent magnets. China is about 85% of global market share on permanent magnets. And the U.S. literally has 0 permanent magnet facility. But beyond that, the United States simply doesn't have the rare earth. And an important point that I think gets missed, it's not simply about mining, it's also about processing all these metals. And it seems quite unlikely that the US will process a lot of these metals because, again, China is about 75–80% of global processing when it comes to a lot of these metals. So even if you dig it out of the ground in the US, you still have to send it to China to process and then get re-exported back to the United States. So this is a very tough challenge, the mining aspect. Manufacturing is where a lot of the activity is, where the action is. And of course, that's really driven a lot of on investment in the last 2 years. We're still in the early stages. So assuming that this sort of publicly driven spending is going to lead to 5 times more private investment, by 2030, this could be up to $2 to $3 trillion of private on investment in clean energy. And lastly, in terms of just sort of the US landscape, again, it's very complicated, but I'll focus on one aspect, which is, of course, a lot of this is going toward the electrification of our economy, right? So the US has a goal of 2035 to have power generation be 100% clean energy. So that's in 10 years roughly. And that's a huge challenge. And that's going to entail a lot more, just exponential growth in solar and wind, a little bit of hydrogen, a lot of nuclear. I know we have a session on nuclear, so I won't talk much about nuclear, but I think it's time to be bullish again on US nuclear after 30–40 years of very little action. I think there's a lot of pro-nuclear trends coming out of the United States finally. So I think that's another thing to take a look at, and we'll talk about that in the next section. But I think if you think about just the power sector, that's going to be the key focus for the next 10 years. It is how to make the clean power sector in tandem with electrification of a big part of our economy. So if that goal is reached by 2035, it should be about 50% of power is going to be the electricity grid. And obviously, I think we know that the United States, one of its biggest deficiencies is its old, outdated, inadequate power transmission. So that's going to be another area that has to be invested in significantly. And that's where the IRA and the BIL comes into place. So I guess to wrap it up, we have this robust industrial policy, probably the biggest one that the United States has launched, probably, I would say, in 40–50 years. And it's predominantly geared toward clean energy. And I know other countries are obviously trying to do their versions of an industrial policy as well. So I think I'll leave it here. I think it's important to think through the politics of decarbonization, because I think it's getting complicated, and in part because every country has its own version of an industrial policy, and that is something we need to think about as we push separately or jointly on decarbonization. But the politics of it is going to get, I think, a little bit more complicated, and we should think more about how we resolve that, because I think, as the previous presenter said, the biggest risk right now to decarbonization efforts is that it's going to be inflationary. It's going to be more costly than it should be. And I think that's probably a suboptimal outcome. And, we want to have deflationary decarbonization. But that may not be the case if the politics of decarbonization do not get resolved. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Damien. Now it's about Q&A, and then we start, Damien, with you. You end up your excellent presentation, which was, all the presentations were excellent, by the way, and thank you to all the speakers, by introducing the political dimension, which is absolutely key, everybody knows that. And so you said that in the 2035, or I may have not understood, the objective in the US is to have 100% of clean energy?
100% of power generation, 100% on electricity to be clean energy, 2035.
Of electricity?
Yep.
Okay,
electricity.
that's
Yeah.
a very, very good and very interesting objective, not only for your country, but for the world, but my question, you see where I come now. My question is that it is very dependent about the evolution of politics in your country. Do you think
Yes.
that according to the results of the presidential race election, this objective will be maintained?
Well, you know, if anyone want to tell me what's happening to my country's politics, I am happy to listen, because I think it's a lot has happened in the last couple weeks. And you know, I don't know if most Americans know you know what's going to happen. But I would agree that there's a pretty significant level of political risk given the outcome. You know, that is something that we unfortunately have to deal with. And but you know, we still have 4 months to the election, and I think what happened with you know, President Joe Biden's decision, I think that was the right one. Ultimately, I think most Americans would agree with that. And so let's see. But I mean, I can't deny that there is going to be, you know, some political risk.
I expected this answer. That means that politics is sometimes very important, not only for the country, but for the rest of the world. Okay, who has questions to the speakers? We have heard 4 excellent speakers, and I have a lot of very, very interesting participants to this. Who wants to start the question? Jacek? I see Jacek. Jacek is a former prime minister, deputy prime minister of Poland. Jacek. No? No, we do not hear you. No? Okay, I give the floor to someone else, and you try to have the sound. Who wants to speak? Yeah, very good. France, please, France.
Yeah, my question is, moving to renewables is inflationary if interest rates are high. If interest rates are low and you can make available low interest rates for the investments in renewables, this should help enormously.
A question for Nicolas. Nicolas, you are still with us?
Yes, thanks, Franz. It will help, but I think the point I was trying to make is if you're in Europe, the real issue is unless you manage to take out existing generation capacity with new renewables, then I agree it will be deflationary. The problem is that today, this is not happening. What is the capacity that is being taken out so far, mostly lignite because it was too old. But I think today, if you look, for example, at the status of nuclear in France, you cannot afford, and Europe typically cannot afford not to have nuclear baseload because it is stabilizing a lot of the copper plate in terms of baseload. But it means that every single euro of investment in renewables comes on top of the existing base. And so this is something that is for Europe. I'm not saying for the world in general, but for Europe, this is a massive challenge. And so we need to work on energy efficiency, which is of paramount importance in Europe. And I think we also need to work on flexibility because the issue of the costs that are moving up is because tackling and managing flexibility in a fairly rigid system is costing a lot of money to the European energy system.
Okay, Marc-Antoine, excuse me, Marc-Antoine, you want to speak? You
Yes.
present yourself because I'm not sure that everyone in China or elsewhere knows you. Before it was Franz Nauschning, before Nicolas. Franz Nauschning was responsible for research for the Austrian Central Bank, Central Bank of Austria. Marc-Antoine.
Yes, many thanks. Many thanks, Edmond, and good afternoon, everyone. I am the head of the Energy and Climate Center at IFRI, the French Institute for International Relations in Paris. Great presentations, and I really appreciate that we have Europeans, Chinese, and Americans around the table. That's very important. May I ask a question to our Chinese colleagues? Do you think it is likely that China sees a peak in its greenhouse gas emissions, maybe next year, maybe in 2026, but in fact, way before the current set target of 2030? And I see some signs of that with maybe a peak in coal consumption, maybe a peak in oil demand. Would you suggest, and what would be the wider implications of that? Thank you very much.
Okay, who wants to take the question? A very, very interesting question. I even read in the press, I don't remember, probably in the Financial Times, that the peak was already attained. But who wants to take the question? I'm sure that you have an idea about that. No one? Okay. Okay, then we go to another question. Jacek, can we give you the...
Yes, I think you can hear me, but unfortunately, can you hear me, Edmond?
Yeah, very well, very well.
My apologies, I had to reinstall Zoom and it wouldn't let me use the microphone. That's what happened. I'm afraid I just had to join, I had to miss the first part, so I haven't actually heard the panel, so I can't ask a question. What I can say, though, in response to the first question, is that although we have to keep the non-renewable base, surely we shall be using it a lot less. We'll only be using it when the renewables can't be used. So therefore, the ongoing investments will be much smaller, simply because that base, whatever it is, nuclear or gas or even at times in some countries lignite, will be used very rarely, and therefore will need much less maintenance and repair and renovation. If I'm wrong, please explain, because I always thought that was the way it worked.
Yeah, I understand there is no question, but I have a question to you, Jacek. A very sensitive question, because Jacek has had extremely important political responsibilities in Poland, and he still has, by the way. And one of the main issues of Poland is that coal remains a very important source of energy. It remains. It has decreased, by the way. It has decreased, and I would appreciate that. Everybody would appreciate your comment about that. But it remains something very important. And I understand the issue for a country like yours. The social dimension of the problem, by the way, which is very important, very important. I do not underestimate it as a former politician. But also the problem that you have to face the transformation of your energy sector. So could you give a few words, if you can, if it is not too sensitive?
No, I don't think it's too sensitive. I understand we're under Chatham House rules, so I hope that
totally.
We'll keep to that. I actually don't see the picture as dark as you do, Edmond. I think there are one of the things you mentioned already is that a few months ago, I think we came down as low as far as energy, as electricity production was concerned, we went down as low as the 50% plus level down from 75% in well, let's say 10 years ago. Now that was temporary because the weather was remarkably good, but the potential is definitely there. And the problem is, in a sense, purely social, in that renewables are just an awful lot cheaper, right? They're an awful lot cheaper, and they are, over time, they're just pushing the coal out. The coal is just getting relatively more and more expensive and unsustainable. So that's one thing. I think and there's no question, everybody in Poland is absolutely conscious of the fact that for the economy as a whole to remain competitive, Poland has to move to renewables, not just to save the world's climate. Obviously, Poland's contribution is not that big, but there is a contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but also to maintain the competitiveness of the whole economy, right? So we've had, since the new government came in, there was an attempt at the very beginning, just after the elections, to push through a very ambitious climate bill, which would have allowed windmills to be built within, we're talking about land, because that's where windmills built on land, that's where it's easiest to do in Poland. There are ambitious plans for windmills on the Baltic, which would generate a lot of electricity, but these are very big and expensive investments. The real push can come from windmills on land, and there was a very ambitious plan and an attempt, indeed, legislation was introduced to reduce, because the distance at the moment is 700 meters from any inhabited building, which excludes the vast bulk of the country, the vast majority of the country. And there was an attempt to reduce this to 300. There was a backlash against that, but now the new government is moving ahead with it 500 meters from buildings, from inhabited buildings, and that will actually increase the area on which land windmills can be built by about 100%. It's a very big, it's a perfectly sufficient increase. The problem with that first law was that there were other elements in it that weren't terribly well designed, and it was actually being done before the new government came in. The new majority in parliament was there, but there wasn't a new government, and it was done by MPs rather than being put through the mill of proper government analysis for risks and so on. This bill is now, as I said, the new bill is now coming through. It will be pushed through. And the social problem, we also shouldn't exaggerate on that. We're talking about 60,000 coal miners. I mean, this is not a huge number of people. They obviously will have to be looked after properly. But, it's really not a massive number of people in a country of 30 million. So I think it's perfectly feasible, and the requirements for the economy to remain competitive, quite apart from the climate issues, the imperative is massively strong. I'm actually more worried about farmers' resistance in the long run, because farmers, you've got to keep your farmers in the long run. At least you've got to have them. Whereas with coal, I think there's a path towards dealing with this problem over a period of 5 to 10 years. It should be perfectly feasible. Thank you, Edmond. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting and very sensible, by the way, very sensible. I recognize my friend. Thank you very much. I'm glad to see people as realistic and as you are for your country. Tian wants to answer the question. Please.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Just now I have a very bad connection, And but someone else explains, you know, a question from Mark Antony to me. So my answer is as follows. And according to my opinion, I believe maybe the common peak timing, maybe in the perhaps we can, you know, pull, I mean, forward the timing to maybe 2028 or something like that. Because, you know, nowadays, actually, China has carry out a lot of activities to for the new energy system construction, and also to improve policies and measures to solve the issues about renewable energy consumption. So perhaps, you know, it's not so easy to solve those problems with within 1 or 2 years. For example, this year, actually, we are suffering the consumption issue, but by introducing some new innovations, just now I explained like some off-grid or microgrid technology, by introducing the combination solutions like wind plus solar, and also the energy storage. And in the meantime, we're introducing the electrolyzer for green hydrogen production. And then we, you know, combine the nitrogen with the nitrogen, hydrogen and the nitrogen together to make the green ammonia. So this is this kind of work is ongoing together with our partners, actually. So in this case, we believe in the next 2 or 3 years, actually, I think we will make some big progress. So this is my opinion. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, it's very good. Thank you very much, Xi. It's a very good, it's a very cautious and realistic answer. Because in fact, in this matter, there is supply, but there is also demand. And demand, we don't have full control over it. We saw it during the crisis in Europe. Terrible impact. And so the fact that you have this variability of the demand you do not control, and the fact that flexibility of fossil fuel is much higher, at least in the equipment, than renewables, and even more for nuclear, makes the prediction about the moment where you will have a decline for a long run, not immediate. Maybe 1 year you can have. You think that you are at the peak, but 2 or 3 years later, you leave the peak. So thank you very much. We understand that when you say 2028, it's a guess. It's a guess, yeah. with all the prudence needed. Okay, is there any other question, or shall we go to the next session? Please. We have a Christian Stoffres, a good friend of mine, who is on the phone. He cannot be with us online. Maybe he will speak. He will be the next speaker on nuclear, on renewables.
Okay.
To see.
I can hear you. I can hear you perfectly well.
You have
You hear me?
something. You have something a question to raise?
You hear me?
Yeah, perfectly well.
I can hear you. What is your question?
Yeah, you have a question to the speakers
Yes.
on
Please give me a
renewables.
question.
On renewables.
I'm especially on nuclear energy.
Yeah, you will speak on nuclear in a few minutes, but I was asking you if you had a question on renewables on the previous session.
I have a question about windmills.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I have the impression that windmill industry is reaching a limit in Europe because of lack of geographical space. And I am not sure that wind energy will be more important in the future. Wind energy has had a very strong expansion in the past 20 years. It started basically in Denmark and Germany, not in the United States. I visited the first windmill site in California, Altamont Pass and PHP Pass, nearby Los Angeles and nearby San Francisco. At the time, they were both inactive. The mills did not run at all. It was bad quality. And the Danish industry took back then Germany, and they perfected the technology, which now is a very precision technology. We build higher and higher mass, but that expansion, I'm not sure will be for more time. I think we are reaching an end for windmill energy. Whereas, contrary, nuclear energy is anchoring a new birth now, a new growth is coming. I think this is the end of wind energy. I understand that this statement is very strong, but this is my impression. I am a specialist of energy. I have been director of strategy at Electricité de France, EDF. I have attended all COPs, all climate UN conferences since the beginning in Rio de Janeiro in 1882. I have been to all of COPs, so I know pretty well the situation from the point of view of the electric industry. I am not speaking from nowhere, I'm speaking from the point of view of my company, which is the largest nuclear company in the world. So I understand I may not be partial.
Okay, thank you, Christian.
I may not be impartial.
You will have the floor in a minute. Someone wants to react to I agree that there is a problem. In my view, there is a difference between the movement in renewables in solar and in wind energy. On wind, and there is a discrepancy between green energy on Earth and on sea. Could you, for example, someone can speak about that, Nicolas, react to what Christian said?
Yes, I understand where you come from, but I would qualify this. I think there are two reasons to qualify it. Exactly to your point, Edmond. I think the dramatic fall in the cost of offshore wind is going to change that. And again, it's more challenging, but it is growing at a pace that, frankly, I did not anticipate during my time at ENGIE. I think the second thing we should not forget is that the improvement in technology is also going to have a big impact. I think today, for example, in Europe, one of the major opportunity is repowering. Today, if you take for example, 800 kilowatt class turbine, you can repower your site with 3.6 to sometimes even 4.2, but let's say 3.6 megawatt turbine. Not only are you increasing the installed capacity, which is not necessarily the key topic, but you're massively increasing the load factor. To give you an idea, we're looking at a site right now. It had a 23, 24% load factor with the former turbines. It will go all the way to 32% load factor with the new turbines. And so I do think that there is a strong momentum for this. I agree that the lead time to get increased in particularly in Europe, it's now 9 years. But I still think that wind energy will be part of that energy revolution and still has a future.
An interesting point is that wind energy is now a specialty of German industry, whereas nuclear is a specialty of France. It's interesting to understand that those two countries, both countries, Germany and France, were sharing the guidance of Europe, are so divergent on energy options, so divergent. It's an interesting topic to see that whereas divergence is diminishing between countries because of the effect of free trade, it's increasing between France and Germany. And it's an issue, a big issue for Europe, because Europe has to arbitrate between those choices, those options. One major weakness of renewables is that they use a lot of geographic space, a lot of space. The density per square kilometer of renewables is very low, contrary to nuclear, which is very concentrated industry. Whereas you need thousands of square kilometers to cover the same, to produce the same energy as a nuclear plant. So this issue of land occupation, land use is very important. It has to be taken into account for trying to predict the future of those industries. The number of square kilometers used to produce 1 kilowatt hour is very different from one source to another.
Okay, you raise a good question. You will expand your point a little bit later on. I have Joachim Levy. Where is Joachim? He left. Joachim?
Hello.
You are there?
Hi, how are you doing?
Joachim
Yes,
Levy, former Minister
of
the
the
Environment of Brazil. No,
hello,
Finance
good morning,
Minister.
good afternoon. Yeah, okay. Well, I just got quite intrigued by the question of the cost in Europe. And in particular, to the extent that in some cases, and I talk here from the experience in Brazil, a lot of the costs of addressing fluctuation in the production of renewables is more operational cost, and basically it's fuel than exactly the capex. Or so it's not a fixed cost, but it's a cost that happens only when you use the gas turbine and so on and so forth. So I wonder why they keep growing, except if you're making new investment in these things, and also, I mean, what's the role of the new technologies? I mean, storage and so on. And I was particularly intrigued by the final comment that maybe what you might need to do is not only to change prices, but also to change the priority to renewables. So I just trying to understand why this is, I mean, the costs are piling up so fast.
This is a question directed to me, but two quick answers. One is because the European market has implemented capacity mechanisms. And those capacity mechanisms are precisely made to help stay or maintain existing capacity rather than building new flexible capabilities. And so today, the cost of, if you look at basically what we call the cone, so cost of new entrant, depending on the various markets in Europe, would be fairly high. It is fairly high because you have an existing asset base that can render the same kind of service just by flexibilizing the existing asset base. Typically, a 15-year-old was not made to run on a daily cycle. It has been flexibilized. The burners have been changed. There has been bypass put into the heat recovery steam generator, and so you can have very flexible CCGT. The impact of that is that you don't need new capacity to compete on a massive scale. Out of those CCGTs is actually pretty low. And I know it's not something that is very trendy to say, but if you look at what's happening on the remuneration of batteries in the UK, in PJM in the US, or sorry, in NEPOOL in the US, etc., prices are just dropping because every time you bring some marginal flexibility, then it kills the profitability of batteries. The major advantage that the legacy assets have is that their remuneration does not depend on those flexibility markets. And so, yes, the cost remains because there is this need for flexibility, and that it is more expensive to bring new flexibility such as batteries rather than using the services of the existing asset base.
Okay, we have two last speakers, and after we stop and go to session 2. Damien, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just a very quick question to Dr. Tianxie. I think green hydrogen is a very fascinating and dynamic area, and I know Longyi has been one of the leaders there. So I'm just curious, two quick questions. What is do you know the percentage of gray hydrogen versus green hydrogen production in China right now? And second question is Longyi aiming to export its green hydrogen production equipment to the rest of the world, or what's the plan?
Thank you, Dami. Thank you for your question. For the first one, sorry, I don't know. I think the ratio is pretty lower for green hydrogen for the moment in China, because a lot of problems here. We still need some policies to stimulate the green hydrogen market. For example, the carbon tax, something like that, which has been introduced in European countries. This is a good example for China to learn in the future. Maybe I can check that, but I'm sure the green hydrogen ratio is still pretty low in China for the moment. And for the second question, definitely we have our alkaline electrolyzers. We have more than 2.5 gigawatt capacity for the moment. So we have the plan to sell our electrolyzers out of China. So nowadays we are, developing the market in some countries in Europe, also in the Middle East area. That's the current situation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tian. Jacek is with us still or not? No, I think he left. Okay, we start the session 2 because we are out of time, and we have to abide by the...
I haven't left. Edmond.
Go ahead.
No. I would just say, or rather ask a question, because I was surprised by Christian's suggestion that Europe has to choose between German wind and French nuclear. My understanding was that they were actually complementary rather than competitive. We need nuclear as a green, climate-friendly way of providing flexibility when the renewables are not available. As we know, that happens quite often. Surely the main problem for nuclear is just how incredibly long it takes to build and how incredibly expensive it is. Or have I got something
Not
wrong?
exactly. No, excuse me, but that's not really true. France was able to build up a huge nuclear electricity program in 5 years. 5 years. This is one of the.
We will take this debate, which is very important, and I have things to say about that myself, a little bit later on, because otherwise I will be out of time. We start. No, Christian, you will have the floor, and don't worry, and you will have the opportunity to answer all the time you need. So we start the session 2 precisely on nuclear. And the title I gave to this session is The Comeback of Nuclear. It's indispensable input in the fight against global warming. So there is no doubt about what I am thinking about it, even though I know that not all the people in Europe, not all the countries in Europe share this view. But that is another problem. And I give immediately the floor for introduction to this issue to Malvina Quist, who is nuclear program lead at the Clean Air Task Force. The Clean Air Task Force is a very dynamic think tank in the US with whom we are used to work, and we are very glad to have you, Malvina, with you. You are not the first speaker of the Clean Air Task Force to come to our events, and I give you the floor with pleasure.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to underline that Clean Air Task Force is now a global organization. We have also staff in Europe and Middle East. I'm actually based in London. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, excellent. So it's a pleasure to be here today. There has been a lot of really interesting conversation already happening. So I'm very happy to be here today to give this introductory speech. I wanted to start by connecting the previous session with this session about nuclear by introducing the concept of technology optionality, which is, in CATF's opinion, essential to actually reaching our climate goals, because it allows to pursue multiple technologies and not relying on any single solution or any single pathway to meet our climate goals. And that's essentially a hedging strategy against unforeseen circumstances. So with that out of the way, I'll move to kind of introduce the nuclear and its role in the climate neutral future. We heard quite a lot earlier today about renewables, which are absolutely complementary to renewable and vice versa. Specific role for nuclear is quite important for a number of reasons, which I listed here. First one is that it's incredibly dense, which means it doesn't take a lot of space and it produces very small volumes of waste. Another important reason is that it can be deployed nearly anywhere in the world, and you don't really have to worry about sort of, resources or weather conditions. For the most part, potentially with exception of massive extreme events such as tsunamis. It really helps to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors because it's capable of production of heat beyond electricity, which is really important for these hard-to-abate sectors. And lastly, but also very important, is that it produces very small amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. And these are not during the operation, but are embedded in the materials and the operation of the plant. And that number is around 6 kilograms of CO2 per megawatt hour. Which is on par. It's pretty much the same as for the wind power, and is significantly lower than for the solar energy. So just to take a quick look on what did the nuclear capacity look like over time. There has been a very rapid deployment of nuclear technologies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which has been followed by a period of stagnation caused by a number of economic issues and growth of nuclear opposition after a couple of very famous nuclear accidents. Most recently, we had, more recently, in early 2000s, there has been an attempt at a nuclear renaissance where a few new projects have been kicked off. However, these experienced major delays and cost and budget overruns, which means that there has been a bit less appetite for new projects. And that has been also impacted by the Fukushima accident in 2011. So looking at how things are looking currently, there is around 440 operatable reactors across the world. They kind of divide in 3 different clusters. First one is in the US with a nice mix of operational reactors, a little bit of decommissioned reactors, and a good number of abandoned projects. The second cluster is in Europe across a number of countries, mostly consisting of the operational reactors and decommissioned reactors. And third one is in Asia, primarily in China, Japan, and India. And the characteristics here are very mixed. Of course, in Japan, there is a number of abandoned and currently shut down reactors after the Fukushima accident. China is incredibly progressing incredibly well with a huge kind of operational fleet, but also huge plans for expansion, which I'll talk about next. So looking at the leaders in nuclear deployment across the world, currently the nuclear lead is US. It has the largest fleet by capacity and has further plans to develop small modular reactors in advanced technologies as well. However, if we look at the kind of share of the electricity that comes from nuclear, France comes into focus with nearly very kind of comparable, very large fleet, but also essentially powering its economy with 70% of nuclear power. However, when we look towards the future, China is coming into focus. It currently is having 56 operational reactors, but also has incredibly ambitious deployment plans with 28 reactors currently under operation and plans for many, many more. And I'm sure that the speaker from China will elaborate on this point. So what is happening with the nuclear resurgence? As I mentioned, there has been an attempt in the early 2000s to kind of bring the nuclear renaissance, and that hasn't really happened. However, we see that now with a number of kind of coexisting drivers that catalyze nuclear scale-up, this could actually start happening now. Starting with climate goals. Climate goals are, of course, one of the primary and really important reason why nuclear is kind of coming up on the agenda. We are halfway through 2020s, and 2030s, 2040s, 2050s goals are really around the corner. So it's time to not just scale the ambition, but actually scale action to deliver that carbon-free electricity. The next driver is energy security. With the kind of growing unrest throughout the world, especially in Central and Eastern Europe due to Russian invasion on Ukraine, we see the increased interest in boosting the energy security of multiple nations and countries that are trying to kind of wean off the imported fossil gas. And the third and kind of coming into focus driver is the demand growth. This is primarily driven by the electrification and growing industries such as data centers that are powering the artificial intelligence revolution, if I may say that. We see that especially in US, demand growth is being off the charts after decades of stagnation, and it's one of the massive reasons why the data center industry is looking towards nuclear as a very reliable source of electricity that can deliver at a small footprint of land. And then, the same kind of ambitions are being reflected in the political scene. We saw in the last last COP in Dubai that over 25 countries, I think, signed a pledge to triple nuclear energy by 2050, which is, an exceptional and historical event. And that has been followed up by the first of a kind nuclear energy summit that happened in March in Brussels, during which heads of state have come out to stage and said, we need to develop more nuclear power and we need to collaborate to make this happen, which was, incredibly inspirational, I think, for the nuclear industry. So if you look at the size of that nuclear resurgence, currently the nuclear capacity is at about 400 gigawatts. The Dubai pledge is aiming at multiplying that and increasing that to approximately 1.2 terawatt of capacity by 2050. However, if you think about not only decarbonizing the electricity and kind of moderate increase of nuclear capacity, but if you're thinking about decarbonizing all of these hard to abate sectors, we could imagine that nuclear, as one of the few low carbon technologies, can deliver a larger share of the global energy demand. So if we say that that would be, for example, 20%, we would see that nuclear would have to increase to as much as 4 terawatts of capacity by 2050. And just thinking about what it means in terms of the rate of addition, currently the nuclear industry is moving quite slowly on a global scale, with adding only 7 gigawatts per annum. However, our peak historical rate is around 30 gigawatts, which is very similar to what we need to achieve to meet the Dubai tripling nuclear capacity pledge. But again, if we look at this more ambitious goal of trying to deliver kind of 20% of global energy from nuclear, we would need to multiply that very large and ambitious rate by 5. So it's a massive challenge, of course. So what are the outstanding hurdles and deployment challenges? Of course, it has been mentioned already today a number of times. Costs are one of the leading difficulties with nuclear currently. However, there is a number of underlying causes that I have listed here to try to kind of help with that issue. First one is the lack of access to sustainable finance and deployment funds. Nuclear simply doesn't have access to most of these funds that other technologies such as renewables have access to, which means that they have to go to kind of mainstream lenders. And in the end, if you look at the final cost of electricity, a large chunk of that, and I mean a lion's share of that, is just cost of finance, not the nuclear technology. So governments can come together and come up with access to some of the sustainable finance that could be available, for example, through the World Bank or Asian Development Fund to enable these technologies to deploy on a much faster scale. Then the second one is not really about lowering costs, but about increasing the revenue that nuclear plants can achieve. And it is all about increasing the value that there is to be captured from reliability and dispatchability. It has been mentioned that a number of countries is developing, for example, the capacity markets. However, it's the value that is possible to capture from these markets isn't really sufficient to cover the investment costs for these new capacities. So this is the situation because currently a lot of the power systems is still kind of propped up with the dispatchable fossil capacity. But as this rolls off the system, the value in these capacity markets needs to increase, or it will increase because the volatility of the electricity prices will increase as well. And the third and very important driver is the fact that nuclear regulatory frameworks internationally are very diverse and often incompatible. So it takes years to license a nuclear reactor in one country. And then if we try to move that technology to another country, the license is not transferable. So the licensing has to restart from scratch. And it is likely to be the new country is likely to have other requirements, which might mean hundreds of technical changes to the design, which of course comes with costs, which is just not a reasonable cycle if we want to scale this technology. So these are kind of the main drivers. If we fix the first three, there's a few more here that could further improve the situation. It's all about kind of moving away from bespoke projects and trying to commoditize nuclear power to have kind of products you can deploy across different geographies without any major changes. It is all about increasing kind of use of nuclear energy beyond electricity, but also expanding into other markets such as hydrogen production or industrial heat, etc. And also about kind of introducing a level playing field between different technologies, and because of that, improved competitiveness. For example, adequate carbon pricing mechanism could help to help compete nuclear with new gas generation. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malwina, for this.
Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Christian Stoffels. Christian.
Yes, I would like to stress the issue that Edmond Alfonderi developed. This is a comeback of nuclear energy. It's an interesting phenomenon to follow the trajectory of nuclear energy since the beginning of the 20th century. At first, it was a laboratory science. Then it became military industry for atomic weapons. Then it spread to industry, electric utility industry. And after some time of enthusiasm, it brutally stopped, with exceptions. France is an exception. France started nuclear energy later because France did not want to be a member of Atoms for Peace Club created by the United States in order to help export of American nuclear engineering industry. So France chose its own way. We have built 60 reactors, 60 in a period of 10 years, 60 reactors. Strangely enough, nuclear energy made to a stop. It was for reasons which are not fully well understood now. Why such an important conquest of science had this huge development in the 1960s and then brutally stopped? Of course, we can incriminate some major accidents which happen in the nuclear industry, but they are not so terrible after all. You have 3 Mile Islands in the United States. You have Chernobyl, of course, in Ukraine, the most important. You have then Fukushima in Japan. But those accidents were not lethal, not at all. Even Chernobyl. I visited Chernobyl many times. I have read all the reports. There was not much casualties. Of course, it's a delicate matter to death accountability. But why did nuclear energy stop? In the US, United States invented civil nuclear energy with Admiral Rickover pressurized water reactor. Then it was developed in Europe, in USSR, Japan, now in China, which has a huge development. But the analysis has not been made. Why was there such a decline in nuclear energy for 20 years? So we now see a kind of comeback of nuclear energy, come back, to use the expression of Edmond Alfonderi. There is a comeback. Comeback in France, comeback in Britain. Britain is in a full expansion of the nuclear program. I learned yesterday that Italy is going back to nuclear also. So I think it's a very interesting issue. I have followed the fate of nuclear energy in international circles like United Nations, climate conferences. In Europe, with the so-called taxonomy policy. Now, there is a kind of rehabilitation of nuclear energy after 20 years, a remontada of the nuclear energy. So this is a very interesting phenomenon to study for international circles, because this is really the solution lies to climate change. Lies, obviously, is a resurrection of nuclear energy. So, in my capacity as international director of EDF, I have the privilege to conduct missions of parliamentarians, senators, and deputies. Every year we organize a world tour of nuclear countries to try to understand why nuclear energy had made us stop. Why? Simple question, why? Why such a promising technology came to an halt? Why? It's too simple to say it is because of the ecologists. Because in fact, if you think nuclear energy is probably the most clean energy you can dream of, especially because it's very compact. As I said earlier, one big benefit of nuclear energy is its capacity. It doesn't use much space, contrary to wind energy or solar energy. We use enormous amounts of space, including the sea now. I think it's a very big question for humanity. I would like to come back to the early ages of nuclear energy after World War II. So there was a development of the atomic weapon, then the try to reconversion of nuclear energy to civil uses. America started, there was President Eisenhower launched the program Atoms for Peace, which was designed to export nuclear technology from the US to European countries. It was very successful. Some countries kept their independence, like France or USSR. But this program was very successful. And the nuclear comeback should deserve a similar treatment, a program for helping countries to develop their nuclear energy. Because it needs standardization. You said earlier that nuclear energy is expensive. If you do it in mass scale, it is cheap. The proof is France. A demonstration is China. It's cheap. France helped China to build up its first nuclear plants in Daya Bay, in the Guangdong province. So we should develop the transfer of technology from nuclear countries to those countries who are not back to nuclear yet, but who deserve to be there. I think it would be a good idea to develop international cooperation to redevelop the comeback of nuclear energy. About the accidents, trilateral, there was nothing happened really. There was just an incident in the plant, but there was no external effect. Chernobyl is different, of course, because there was a huge explosion with particles. But there was almost no casualty in Chernobyl, almost. Fukushima, not at all. There was, of course, a tsunami, very impressive, but not a real accident outside the plant. So we have to make a comeback to study the nature of these accidents, I think, to rehabilitate nuclear energy, because the analysis has to be made and to be made popular what really happened. Of course, another weakness of nuclear energy is nuclear waste, radioactive waste. There are 3 sites in the world conceived to bury long-term bury of nuclear waste. It's Yucca Mountain in California, Nevada more exactly. Yucca Mountain, you have Oskarshamn in Sweden. You have one site is in construction in France. You have 2 or 3 sites to shelter nuclear waste. And all of these are very easy to understand. I think that in some years, when we come back to this period, people will ask questions, why did you make such a problem with nuclear waste? There is no real problem. About accidents, the repetition of TMI or Chernobyl, the nuclear safety standards have been strongly increased. Of course, you cannot say zero risk doesn't exist, but nuclear risk has been reduced to a very small proportion, especially if you compare to the casualties by coal mines. China knows very well what means coal mines casualties. there is no similar recourse in nuclear energy. The big problem of security is the coal mines, not the nuclear one. The problem of visibility, especially in space, long use occupation or sea construction, is nuclear. So I think that the comeback of nuclear energy deserves an international program. And the basis for this has been built this year with the Dubai UN COP, Dubai Rehabilitated Nuclear Energy. I have followed all COPs since Rio de Janeiro in 1992. I have been participant to 20 COPs, from COP1 in Rio to COP28 in Dubai. All of them were hostile to nuclear energy. My job was to do lobbying for nuclear energy in those conferences, and I was in a very huge minority. Things have changed. Europe has adopted the taxonomy classification. UN has adopted the Dubai statement. So now the field is ready to build up a world program for rehabilitation for the comeback of nuclear energy, to develop measures. Of course, the proliferation issue was a major impediment to nuclear energy, but that doesn't exist anymore, because now there is a credibility in non-proliferation issues. You may course to build non-proliferation. Iraq and Iran knows very well what I mean. International community has taken the full measurement of proliferation. So I think this obstacle has disappeared also. Proliferation, nuclear waste. The time is ready to build up an international program for nuclear comeback. Analog in its spirit, what was Atoms for Peace, developed in 1954 by President Eisenhower. This is a practical proposal to develop an international program for nuclear rehabilitation. And I must also stress that in my generation, I was born in the 1950s. There was enthusiasm. There was enthusiasm for nuclear energy. Atomium was the symbol of the world exposition in Brussels in 1957. Young scientists, ambitious scientists, wish to become equivalent of Einstein. So it was very popular among the young scientists. Now it's finished. In the past 20 years, nuclear energy has been ostracized.
We are out of
yes,
time.
I finish on my proposal. Let's build up an international program for nuclear comeback. Countries like China and France could be the lead. This is a proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Christian.
President Alfonderi must understand me.
Christian, thank you very much.
Yes, finished. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this pledge for nuclear. It's important, but I'm not sure that it is totally the right audience. But it's something very important, because public opinion is key in this matter. Public opinion is key. And there are not enough people that are pledging in favor of nuclear. Obviously, because you see, nuclear needs political decisions, and politicians are very dependent about public opinion. And when you are raising, Christian, the evolution on nuclear in the 19th, obviously it was the public opinion that changed the mood, the political mood.
If you allow me something, I think it's not political, it's more than political. It's societal. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah, it's
decision by
societal.
society.
I agree. But politics is society, and society is at the heart of politics. So I agree that your speech is indispensable. I'm not sure. I'm sure that it would be worth to do it to do this exercise in other audience. Now I go to Mr. Sheng Zhu. Sheng, you have the floor. He's associate professor at Tsinghua University. Sheng, you have the floor.
Let me advertising for my next publication. I am publishing my memoirs. Atom service, both services de l'atome, electronuclear memories. I am publishing my memoirs next month.
Okay. Thank you.
If you want to learn more.
Yeah. Okay. We'll read it with pleasure. So, Sheng, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. It's my honor to attend this meeting to share some information for the nuclear power generation channel under the climate change targets. I think this is the current status for the nuclear channel, and now there are about 55 units are put into operational, and 27 units are under constructions, and another 41 units are planned. So totally there are about 127 gigawatts. This will be the #1 skill for the nuclear in the future. And the right figure shows the electricity source of the power sectors. You can also see that most of the electricity from the coal generation. And the second one is for the hydropower. And for the nuclear in China is only 5%, which is much less than the average level in the world. It means that if the nuclear share increase to the average level of the world, that means a lot of nuclear plants will be built in the future. So if we, for China government to address in the climate change, there are a lot of work and efforts has done to reduce the greenhouse gas. So especially for the carbon peaking targets, which will be before 2030. What this means? This means that at that years, 25 of non-fossil energy are needed. The second target is for the neutral targets before 2060. It also means that more than 80% of the non-fossil energy are needed. So what this means? This means a lot of potential for the nuclear in China. There are 4 potential. The first one is for the generation, which will be competitive with the coal generation and the renewable energy in the long term. The second is for the nuclear heating. The third one is for hydrogen productions for zero carbon feedstock or fuel. The fourth one is for the nuclear repowering the existing coal boilers in the short term. And the first for the nuclear supply, because for China, the total electricity will be double by 2020. That means per capita electricity consumption will be increased to 7,000 or 10,000 kilometers. So for the nuclear supply will be continue increase by 5 or 10 gigawatts per year in the short term. That means by 2060, the total nuclear supply will be increased to 250 gigawatts or 500 gigawatts. And the share will be increased to 10% or 20%. This means a lot of trillions of investment in this nuclear industry in the future. And the second potential is for the nuclear heating, for the district heating. And now in China, there are 3 projects from the commercial nuclear plants to restrict the heating for the district heating. The first one is lies in Shandong Haiyang nuclear plants, which was first put into operational in 2019. And last year, this project has supplied 2 cities and through 23 kilometer pipelines. And the heating scale has reached 112 million square meters. And it has reduced the carbon reduced about 700,000 tons every year. This for the district heating. And for the industrial steam supply from the nuclear, this is also has a project has commissioned in the June this year in the in the Jiangsu province, and it has supplied the steam, industrial steam, to the nearby petrochemical industry base, and every year it has supplied about 4.8 million tons of industrial steam, and it also reduced the carbon dioxide about 1 million tons every year. And the third is for potential for the hydrogen produced high temperature gas reactors. And the hydrogen is also used the steel making. And this technology is just under research and development in China. And if in the future it's commercialized, it will be reduced huge CO2 reductions. And the key study shows that for use of this technology, more than 90% CO2 will be reduced. And for this technology, the most challenging is that how to produce the hydrogen in large scale and low cost in the future. And the fourth one for the nuclear repowering, the existing cogeneration or heating or CHP in China. This figure shows the technology demonstration. You can also say that we can use the reactors to replace the coal boilers and reuse the existing steam turbine and all other equipments. For this technology will be reduced the investment by 1/3 and also give a lot of job opportunity for the existing coal power staffs, so which can make it attractive for the public acceptance. And now we have some case study for this technology. And above is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very informative presentation. Last but certainly not least speaker, Daniel Ponoan, former US Deputy Secretary of Energy and former President and CEO of Centrus Energy Corporation. Daniel, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Please, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Good. First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the International Finance Forum, the Task Force on Carbon Pricing in Europe, and the Paulson Institute for hosting this important session. I have been fascinated by the presentation so far. I would just note, in April, I had the opportunity to travel to Beijing, both as part of the Aspen Strategy Group for important Track 2 dialogue with the Communist Party School, and also as part of a World Resource Institute in Colombia conference with the National Center for Climate Change Strategy in China. And Professor Zhou's remarks were highly resonant with those conversations. I just also returned from Europe in May. I spent a week in Berlin and Munich as a guest of the American Academy of Berlin. And I was invited over specifically to talk about nuclear energy, which will be the entry point for my remarks. I made three basic talking points all week in Germany. Number one, the inconvenient truth that many people learned from Vice President Al Gore about the problem of climate change in 2006 has now been joined by two additional inconvenient truths. The second inconvenient truth is that the world is way off track in meeting its Paris climate targets, and we're missing it by a mile or several kilometers, depending on your form of measurement. And the third inconvenient truth, at least for Germans, it was inconvenient, is the only way to close this gap is with nuclear, and not just a bit, but a lot. So let me talk about this. And Mr. Chairman, I think you made a very important point a few moments ago about political support being a critical gating factor. So let me just speak from a U.S. perspective. There is extraordinary support in recent years for nuclear energy. I think at the public at large, it's now around 70% of the people. Interestingly, the only demographic that is still rather skeptical about nuclear is my demographic, 60 and older. It's very interesting. And candidly, I found a bit of that in Germany in my recent visit as well. At a government level, you have also really quite extraordinary bipartisan support. You may have noticed we have been having some rather debates on a number of issues in our country. That having been said, in 2023, the Nuclear Fuel Security Act passed the U.S. Senate by a vote of 96-3. And we just recently passed something called the Advance Act that passed the U.S. Senate by 88-2 and the House by an overwhelming majority, all of which was seeking to advance the accelerated deployment of nuclear energy. So at least in the U.S., we have social license, and I'm going to come back in a few moments to a global take on that. And I want to thank Dr. Kvist's extraordinary presentation a few months ago. I think really helped us understand this. But let me talk about the context in which this is being considered in the United States. About a year ago, in the spring of 2023, the United States Department of Energy released a report called a Commercial Liftoff Report. It's available to anyone who wishes to read it. And that report said that for the United States alone to meet its climate objectives of net zero by 2050 would require the deployment of 700 gigawatts of new power generation by 2050. They split that into 500 renewable and 200 for nuclear. Now, to put that in some perspective, we now have just under 100 gigawatts of installed nuclear capacity in the United States. To get that number from 100 to basically 300 by 2050 over 25 years would be an extraordinary accomplishment. And I really like Dr. Kvist's chart that showed the pacing and needing to get to that rate of deployment, which we have achieved once before. So I would say it is a heroic but not unachievable objective to meet that. But that was last year. A few weeks ago, the Department of Energy released another report that now said by 2050, demand would require additional power generation of 950 gigawatts. What happened 1 year to go up 250 gigawatts is extraordinary, and it is indeed all related to this burgeoning of power demand that is being generated by the data center requirements and additional computational requirements of this AI revolution that we are now experiencing, which is just blown demand signals through the roof. What does that mean? For the United States, that means we're going to need a lot more nuclear. And by the way, I was just talking about the numbers for the United States. Just multiply that across the world, and you can see the numbers are truly extraordinary. And what that also means is that we're going to need both large and small reactors. I think in the United States, and indeed in many countries, there is an understandable, and I agree with, enthusiasm about this whole new generation of advanced reactors. And I won't go longer because Professor Zhou, I thought, did a very eloquent job of talking about the use of nuclear to support industrial processes because of the higher outlet temperatures of some of these high temperature gas cooled reactors. You can make steel, you can do hydrogen. And if we have to decarbonize not just power generation, but industrial processes, that's going to be critical. but you're not going to fill a hole the size that I've described without adding a lot of traditional large reactors. The good news is that the trends that I'm describing in the United States are not confined to the United States. Again, as Dr. Kvist noted, we had a very powerful statement at COP28. I was there, where over 20 countries called for a tripling of nuclear power by 2050, as she put in her charts. I understand that efforts are underway to increase the number of pledges as we head into COP29, committed to that destination. I would just end by talking about some of the obstacles. But before I say that, I want to say one word about size. And I have this analogy for both Germany and China. I could find the right cities. But in terms of land use, one of the salient advantages is the power density of nuclear. And for those of you familiar with New York City, a 1,000 megawatt plant would require about as much land as you have in Central Park. 1,000 megawatts of solar requires as much land as you have in Brooklyn. And 1,000 megawatts of wind takes all 5 boroughs of New York City. And this is something that is very seldom understood or discussed, but it's one of the salient advantages of nuclear. And when we talk about the obstacles, one of the obstacles is cost. And when you consider the upside of much less land use, that's one way to cure that problem. Other challenges we need to overcome are the supply chain. I spent a lot of time working on the nuclear fuel cycle. That's going to be critical. And the market misdesign that I think Dr. Kvist also very clearly articulated, in which nuclear is not rewarded for its salient attributes in terms of 724 availability, complete reliability. When we had a polar vortex in the United States that froze coal plants and froze gas plants, the nuclear power plants kept a lot of people from freezing to death. So people have to, I think, adjust market design so that the capacity factors that nuclear provides, the backstopping of renewables that other speakers have discussed, is rewarded and so forth. And I would just end by sort of echoing the comment, again, one of Dr. Kvist's comments, that we really have to, if we're going to achieve these very heroic targets of building much more nuclear in a short period of time, as one of our US leaders, Jigar Shah, has said, we have to stop building nuclear power plants like airports and start building them like airplanes. We have to get away from big projects and into a production phase that can possibly meet these extraordinary climate requirements for our planet. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your enthusiasm, which I share, by the way. And I would be glad if your country took this orientation at the scale you imagine, because it would give a tremendous boost for the rest of the world, which we need in the fight against climate change. And I will ask you to come back in some of my events in order to show that there are people that are really enthusiastic in favor of nuclear and that believe that nuclear is absolutely indispensable. I think that we have to convince the world that without nuclear, but nuclear that means a lot of investment. Without nuclear at a large scale, we will fail. I think that renewable is indispensable, absolutely indispensable. But without nuclear, we will fail. And something else which I liked you in your speech is that we should stick to the kind of plants and nuclears that we know well and that are not too expensive, too new, and so on. I'm sorry, I've been chairman of EDF long time ago. So, and I think that at that time the EPR was already on my table 30 years ago, and now we are in this type of reactor, which is extremely expensive and which needs a lot of time to build. And I think that we have to think again to the policy in terms of nuclear in France and in Europe, by the way, because what France is doing, France is coming back to nuclear after a period which I must say that I dislike very much. We shut down one plant in Fessenheim, which 3 or 4 years ago, which was a very, very big mistake. But it's okay, it's like that. And now we come back, and we come back for the well-being of the rest of Europe as well. Because if they don't want to build plants, let us do them in France and export electricity to the rest of Europe, which we did in the past at a large scale. So thank you very much. I think that it's very important.
I just make one comment on your excellent comment, Mr. Chairman, which is the zeitgeist in Germany, and I'd say throughout Europe, has really transformed. And I would say that really Germany, my perception, you're the Europeans here, from my travels, is that outside of Germany and Austria, you have just a very strong degree of support all up and down Central Europe, Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, Slovakia, obviously Ukraine, Belgium is reconsidering. The Dutch have their new government is going to build 4 instead of 2. So I think that things are moving. And even in my very intensive set of discussions in Germany, I found a distribution that, similar to the United States. The oldest people were the most anti-nuclear. The youngest were the most pro-nuclear. I had enthusiastic undergraduate audiences. I had, after one of my speeches, a young man come up to me and say, I'm in the Green Party, but it's only the old Greens who hate nuclear. I would say the vast majority of the Germans I spoke to, I would put in a Brexit mentality, which is, they would say, I don't know if it was smart or dumb to close all our nuclear power plants, but it's like Brexit, we're not going back. But I think the needle has definitely changed, and France has been such a great leader, and I think will continue to do that. And if they can export, to the point somebody made earlier, in a way that backstops to what looks to me like an overdeployment of wind in places like Germany, that could really help knit things together and optimize overall system costs.
Very good, very good. We have 20 minutes of debate, so I give the floor to those who want to take it. Philippe Varin, Philippe, you want to say a few comments?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yes, yes, indeed. Perhaps just a comment on the nuclear, because what is Dan just told and what you said as well, I fully support. What has not been mentioned so far is really the big potential of the new smart, fast neutron, SMR. I see, well, you know it, we have currently in France now probably 12 startups on nuclear, which has been absolutely, it was unthinkable 2 or 3 years ago, right? And I am pretty confident about the speed of the speed we will see, but the development and the potential, because we have, if you look at the French situation, you know very well, we have probably a roadmap to have a concept of sustainable nuclear park in the future, where you add to the existing EPRs and you will add new ones, but you can add 2 or 3 fast neutron small reactors to burn the fuel, spent fuel, and to reduce the waste at a level which are such that for the 100 years to come, we could even use the past waste that we have, stocked in France. So there are absolutely new concepts here that can, are here to reinforce what you were saying about the importance of nuclear.
Thank you. I fully share your point, Philippe. And I must say that it is not only in France, but also in the US. I know that Bill Gates is interested in SMR.
Yeah,
among many other people. But good point. I think that Franz Narschling wants to speak. Franz.
Yes, just one comment. When the Germans shut down their nuclear power plants, now in Germany there is nearly as much nuclear power. It's not from German nuclear power plants, it's from French nuclear power plants. So we are importing nuclear power from France. The problem in Germany is that the electricity network is not strong enough to bring the wind power we have in the north to the south. So we cannot use what we have in Austria. We are having a lot of renewable power in water power. And when the electricity prices, when the wind was blowing and the sun was shining in Germany, we were pumping water up in the Alps and exported electricity when we needed it. But as the German electricity net was not strong enough, we had to cut this.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Germany, well, I think that the worst mistake in Germany has been to close the nuclear plants. And they realize it today. I think that the left and the right realize it. But you have to remember that it is the right or the center right that did it. And not the Greens, the center right. And they realized it was a mistake. They don't say it like that, but we all know that they know it. Okay, who wants to speak?
Let's come back to the French-German issue. Let me recall that the creation of the European Union was the end of the war between France and Germany on coal mines. There were the wars of Ruhr occupation, Saar mandate, Saarland. It was an issue of division and battles between France and Germany during one century, 19th century to 1947. We are seeing the renaissance of such war. President Alpha talked about the closing down of Fessenheim nuclear plant. Fessenheim was not a French plant. It was a French territory, but nearby the borderline. So if Fessenheim was closed, it was under the pressure of Germany. That's an example of how it can degenerate. And I think it's an issue for the French of Europe to see how we can solve the French-German problem with nuclear energy.
Very much. Is there someone else that wants to speak? Yeah, Jacek, I think you'd want to speak. No, Jacek, no?
Yes, thank you, Edmond. I still haven't really heard an answer, although it has been said that the costs and the lead times on nuclear power stations could be reduced. I still haven't understood why they've become so long and how they can be reduced. Because frankly, as a country that would not be a producer of nuclear power stations, but one which is very keen to be a customer for nuclear power stations, the greatest problem is the enormous financing cost, of course, but on top of that, the extraordinarily long lead times. And not only are they long, but they seem to be completely unpredictable. I mean, the classical case of the Finnish power station, which took 20 years to build. And since there are so many eminent experts in the nuclear industry, I would very much like to hear their opinion as to why these behemoths are so expensive and so unpredictable to build. As for SMRs, there isn't actually a single SMR that's actually producing on a commercial scale, as far as I understand it. So although that sounds very nice, it's a technology that still has to be rolled out. But maybe I'm wrong on that. That's my understanding, and I'd be very interested to hear comments. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
If I may, because I've worked in nuclear in the past, not only at EDF, by the way. I was on the board of NG, and we had we were owning all the nuclear plants in Belgium. The nuclear, you have to make a distinction when you think about cost, and you know that perfectly because you are an economist, between the total cost and the marginal cost. And in the nuclear, it's extremely important to make the distinction between the total cost, which might be high, and the marginal cost, which is rather low and competitive. I know that because at the time I was at EDF, I took a decision which the people at EDF disliked and criticized very much, which is to reduce significantly. I decided it myself as the president of EDF to reduce significantly the tariffs of electricity by 14%, which was a boon for the French economy. And it was feasible, perfectly feasible. For simple, marginal cost was very low. Obviously, we had a high total cost. So this is an advantage of nuclear. The second advantage is that there is a stability in the cost over time. And these two advantages explain why nuclear is still on rise. But obviously, you are right. When you take the decision investing, you have to be careful about even the total cost, because total cost now can be high due to interest rates. So,
Edmond,
please, yeah.
Now, just to add to what you said for Janesh, I come back to the small modular reactors. There are two important differences with the existing technologies. One is in terms of safety, because of questions of the critical mass. You can avoid to have active safety mechanism and to have a very simple passive safety mechanism. And when you go to active safety, you have to multiply by 3 all the equipments of sending water and everything, tanks, and you don't do this in the small modular reactors, because you can have much more simple mechanism, and this is one thing. And the second thing, I'm convinced that you can save a lot if you go from building the plants on site, or if you make small modular reactors modules on a plant, and with the quality and a very lean process. It's radically different. If you add the two things, I'm convinced that the potential of reduction is huge.
Thank you, Philippe. We have
Christian.
I'm sorry.
To answer that question, the best method is a case study, experimental method. We can make the difference between what France achieved with its nuclear program from 1973 to 1985. At the time, I had the privilege to be a close advisor to the minister. We had a crash program. We built up 60 reactors in 10 years' time. You can make the comparison with EPR, European Power Reactor, which was a major failure. It took 20 years to build up. The cost was multiplied by 3. Make the comparison between the nuclear program in France and the EPR. This is very instructive. And we made investigation, of course. That investigation was made. And one major explanation is a lack of leadership. The French nuclear program was led under the pressure of urgency of nuclear oil shocks of 1973. it was like a defense program with a general and hierarchy, whereas the EPR was a battle for influence and license cost.
Yeah, but
Too many
Christian,
leaders.
Too many leaders. Sorry.
Christian,
Napoleon said that.
Yeah.
Emperor Napoleon said after the Battle of Austerlitz, to win a battle is better to have one bad general than two good generals.
Okay, Christian, thank you. Philippe,
one word, not to disagree with what Christian has said, and I think but I would add nevertheless one thing for the EPRs. No, I've been in charge of the all kilowatt turnarounds. It's definitely the post Fukushima safety equipments, which are and all the design. It's not exactly what it was in the previous reactors. So that is the reason why it's an additional reason for the cost today. And it's the reason why if we go to the SMR, we will simplify drastically the thing. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you. We have two last speakers for 2 minutes each because we have to close at 5 o'clock. Malvina, Malvina.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly come back to Jacek's question about the cost of nuclear. I think there was many very, very good points made, but I wanted to underline that the first and foremost driver for increased costs of nuclear is the fact that the Western world has just forgotten how to build them, which means the construction takes incredibly long. And during the construction period, the finance for nuclear is exceptionally expensive because of the construction risks, which means that the interest rates are incredibly high. The costs are piling up before the plant starts operating, which means that overall costs increase massively. So that's one of the top drivers. And then another comment I wanted to make is on system costs. It has been mentioned in passing, but I wanted to really come back to that issue to pin it as a really important factor. I think quite often policymakers are talking about decarbonizational technologies in terms of what is the levelized cost of electricity with these technologies. And it's kind of not comparing apples to apples where nuclear can provide all of these additional attributes such as dispatchability. It is essentially a clean, firm technology. So when we actually look at the cost of these technologies on system level, and when we incorporate the required investment for the transmission networks and the balancing of the non-dispatchable variable renewable generation, nuclear actually is not that expensive. I've seen a study that looked at the exact numbers for the Polish system, which deemed nuclear to be actually the cheapest option to decarbonize Polish economy. I'm Polish, so that's the example. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good point. The last word to Daniel Poneman. Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. And just to respond very briefly to these excellent comments, to Philippe Varenne, he made a very important point that these high temperature, fast neutron reactors can actually use used fuel as fuel, and that extends enormously the prodigious resource that you have available at the same time as it reduces the waste problem. Secondly, on Franz Nauschnig's point about the German electricity grid, and this is a little bit related to Malvina's comments, this is a huge problem. And it's not just, as Malvina correctly says, that people don't count transmission when they compare so-called levelized costs of electricity, but the political obstacles, at least in the United States, of long distance transmission are enormous. And if you built out the high powered transmission needed to bring renewables from where the wind blows and the sun shines to the load centers, would, at the rate we build out high voltage transmission in the United States, would take 150 years. So it's not only a cost issue, it's a political feasibility issue. And so when Malvina makes a very important point, when you're measuring levelized cost of electricity, solar looks very, very cheap compared to nuclear. But when you add in not only the transmission, but the backstopping dispatchable power and the battery power, nuclear becomes much more competitive. And that segues to the last point where Dr. Rostowski was talking about costs and asking why they're so high. Malvina got it right again. The United States stopped building for 30 years. What do you think happens? We lose the supply chain, we lose the talent pool, And so the Vogtle project, which was the first new reactor built in 30 years, guess what? It was late and it was over budget. But note, Vogtle 3 cost $18 billion, Vogtle 4 cost 12. And the steep learning curve is incredible. China built 37 reactors in the last 10 years. In the UAE, they were on time and on budget. I do not believe that the rest of us and our countries are congenitally incapable of this, but we've got to get the supply chain and the talent pool back. And finally, part of the reaction of Fukushima obviously was this over-regulation. And unless we can be more streamlined in regulating this and still be very conscientious about safety, we're not going to be able to really optimize the pace of construction that is required. But part of the issue is the sort of the social license and the political opposition to nuclear overall has funneled, at least in the United States, into the regulatory process. And people who don't like nuclear at a sort of emotional level use the regulatory process to trip it up. And that's another problem that we have to overcome. I know we're out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I want to thank you again for really an outstanding session.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There was a lot of passion in this last session, and I think that we will come back to nuclear. We'll come back to nuclear. I will ask my associate, the Paulson Institute and the International Finance Forum, to organize an event focused on nuclear only. And we'll invite people that are more skeptical about nuclear, because if we speak, we all think the same. So it's interesting, by the way, but we don't have to convince anyone, because we all are very much in favor of nuclear. And we know that it is indispensable to the fight against global warming. Now, let me end first by thanking you, the speakers, the participants, not only the speakers, but also the participants, for your excellent interventions, and your passion, at least in the second session. And let me also thank the two other think tanks, high-level think tanks, the Paulson Institute, the American Paulson Institute, and the Chinese International Finance Forum. And I have a thought for Joanna. Joanna is with us because Joanna is a key in the organization of these events. So thank you to all of you. It was a real pleasure to attend this event, and I wish you all the best. And I hope we will find many other occasions to participate to this kind of events. So all the best to all of you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.